going to be an in-depth thing. You know, I'm trying to get, like I told you on the phone, I'm trying to get to everybody.
Well, I read your thing on Day the Earth stood still, and I was impressed with the depth that you did it with. Of course, the whole Bond phenomena is a much broader, wider thing than any single picture. It's one of the real, you know, one of the most unusual um, collection of pictures. It's certainly the most outstanding series of any
Hmm.
of all time. Uh, it's odd here in the United States. People kind of ignore it. They never mention any of the pictures as being on any lists of good pictures and stuff like that. Perhaps because it was made, them were made in England. But there's no doubt in my mind that the Bond pictures have really influenced the whole course of action-adventure movies. And whether they like it or not, they've left their impact on all picture making. They also came at a time when the picture business was in the doldrums. And I heard Spiro Skouras when Cubby was awarded, I don't know, it was Man of the Year by some boys' club in Brooklyn, uh, say that the Bond pictures had kind of revitalized the whole damn picture business, both here and in England, um, and made picture going a lot of fun again, the way it was in the old days. You know, I
So they level on this thing if it's okay. It's kind of ironic that these are the only English, if you can say they're English films, and they're done mostly in England. Yet they don't seem like that. You don't hear about British films ever doing anything. It seems that they were in a class by themselves, and that they were really exploited in America like no other English film ever was.
well, that's because the producers and the writer, the original writer myself, were all Americans.
Right.
You know, and
Oh, let me just put on this, or sit over here. Do you want to sit over here for a minute, or just want me to switch you around?
doesn't make any difference.
I finally got rid of a cord, so I don't have to drag that cord around anymore. Thank you so much.
All right, darling, let's close the
It's,
doors so that we won't.
It's low-fat milk, though.
Oh, I drink non-fat, so that's great.
Oh. Okay.
I think the best thing that we can do. I think the best thing we can do is for you to ask me questions.
Well,
Because there's it's such an enormous field. It's so much to talk about that I might get off on some irrelevancies. All I want to say is that, you know, in any thing of this sort and that involves a group of people, everybody, because it's only natural, they tend to aggrandize themselves to and to exaggerate the value of their contribution. I suppose that, as I said, I suppose that's only natural. And I'm sure there'll be all kinds of conflicting ideas on how this was done and how that was done, and who thought of this and who thought of that. My own position is that after we did a couple of them and they were successful, and I was asked to write articles for Esquire and Playboy, I made a mistake, I think, in over accentuating the teamwork that went into the thing. To such an extent that now, you know, a Cubby goes around saying everything is written in committee and so forth and so on. And to a certain extent, that is true. There are a lot of people who were involved. But in the last analysis, somebody's got to collate the whole thing and make it all possible.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, on this last thing, The Spy Who Loved Me, there were 16 writers on it before I was
That's what I
writing
heard.
it. And, you know, now when they say, where was the committee before I got there? As soon as I got there, we got a story, we got a script. Later, of course, Christopher Wood was put on when Lewis Gilbert came on. But he's worked with Lewis several times, and I think he did a very good job of adding and amending and editing and stuff like that. My script, and I think Lewis did a very good job. But they're still I think Merv Griffin's show. Cubby said something about it's all done in committee. But where was the committee before I got there? You know. Anyway, I'm going to try to be as objective as I possibly can, but ever since I wrote this article that this is the kind of the group method of doing a script, I've never been allowed to forget it. The only thing I know that is that 8 times in a row, and 8 times they've asked me to come back and do the scripts. Sometimes while they had started with other people and so forth, and unless there was something that I contributed that was important, I don't think that men who were as shrewd as Cubby and Harry would have asked me to come back again and again. You know.
In that I feel that since you're such a key person in this series and that you've been on it so long and that you have been on it 8 films and being from the writer point, I want to know a little bit about you. I've read kind of a minor summary of your screen credits and a couple sources. You're originally from New York?
Yes.
And you went to school at New York University?
And the University of Iowa.
Uh-huh. What did you study there?
Speech and dramatic art.
Speech and dramatic.
And I wrote a play there called The Tree, which is produced there, and then it was seen by a New York producer, and he produced it on Broadway. It was one of the first American plays about lynching. And
did you come from a dramatic family?
No, my father was the design engineer of the New York Edison Company, a very scientific gentleman who could never understand why he had a son who was so lousy in mathematics. No, we never had anything to do with the theater or anything of that sort. I went to the University of Iowa because it had a marvelous drama school at that time, and it still has, one of the best in the country. And this was after I'd been to NYU. And I also, had been a young actor in New York, and I was kind of torn between whether I should be an actor or a writer, or I thought perhaps I'd be both. But when I went to Iowa, and I met a man named Professor E.C. Maibaum, one of the great people in the whole tributary theater. He really thought up the idea of the Federal Theater, and although Hallie Flanagan got the credit for it, he has turned out, or he did turn out, he's dead now, he turned out many, many people in the professional theater, and also many people in collegiate theaters and little theaters and the tributary theaters. I can't tell you how many of them. There's hundreds of them. He was a great, great man. And when he read my first play, The Tree, he said to me, "You're here to write plays." And he practically tore the curricula apart to let me write plays. And I wrote 7 or 8 plays in 1 year, and several of them were done. Well, one of these was The Tree, a play about lynching, and it was seen by a New York producer, and he did it. And then I got my master's and my bachelor's and my master's, and I went to New York, and I was a player with the New York Shakespeare Repertory Theater, and I played 17 roles there, always the villains. I was the youngest man that ever played Iago on the Broadway stage. And I kept writing all the time, and Bob Rossin, of whom you've heard, of course, he directed The Tree and produced my second play, which is called Birthright, a play about the Nazis, one of the first plays about the Nazis, too. And they were good plays and exciting, but they didn't run. I think the Birthright particularly, was kind of ahead of its time.
This is like during the early...
This was 1933.
33 before.
And people weren't alerted to the Hitler difficulty yet, the threat. And so I said to myself, well, maybe I don't write plays that make money because I can't. Let's see if I can't do something that really runs. So I wrote a play called Sweet Mystery of Life, which was a satire on the life insurance business, a funny one. Herman Shumlin produced it, and on the basis of that, I got my contract to come to Metro to be a writer. And I came here, I was about 25 years old, and just got married and came out here, and then I began to write as a writer for Metro, and I wrote for Metro and Columbia and Paramount and 20th Century, and I had another play on Broadway called See My Lawyer that Milton Berle starred in, that ran all season of 1939, I think. And then I came back, and then the war broke out, and I became a captain in the Signal Corps in the United States Army. I was in there for 4 years and ended up as a lieutenant colonel.
You were in a combat film division?
Combat Film Division,
Like
yes.
Capra's unit, something like
No,
that?
no, I had a unit of my own, the Industrial Services Division first, and I wrote and produced and directed and was responsible for about 11 films that were shown in factories to stimulate war activity,
production,
which
sure.
interpreted to the workers how responsible and how valuable they were in the war production. Then I was transferred to the Combat Films Division, and we made secret staff film reports and historical films and various other documentaries about various combat activities, and we had many, many crews that we sent out all over the world. And I ended up as a lieutenant colonel, and when the war was over, I then came to Paramount as a writer-producer. And I did 9 films for Paramount, wrote them and produced them. And they were.
I have a list. I think a couple of your
Yeah,
films.
they were. The first one was OSS with Alan Ladd, and there was The Big Clock, and The Great Gatsby with Alan Ladd, and
You did that
many
with
others.
Cy Hume.
Yes, I did.
Ironically, I'm writing a story right now about Cy's film Forbidden Planet.
You mean Forbidden Planet? It's the best, in my estimation, it's the best science fiction that we ever did. And as a matter of fact, Cy and I, before he wrote Forbidden Planet, we wrote a treatment for a picture called BEM, Bug-Eyed Monster, which dealt about an editor of a science fiction magazine who just to drum up business with the kids started a campaign that he had been approached by beings from outer space, and that he wanted us to prepare for them to be received here. And then one day somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Good work." And it really was somebody from outer space, and all that happened after. Furthermore, we bought a story by Murray Leinster called First Contact, and we took an option on it, and we wrote a screenplay, and we called it First Encounter.
Isn't that ironic?
It was ironic. It was exactly the story that is now
Close Encounters.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or whatever it is.
Where did you meet Cy? At MGM?
It was very simple. One day I was called into Harry Rapp's office, and there sat a tall, distinguished, gray-haired man, and I was told, "Dick, this is Cyril Hume. He's going to be your collaborator." And we went to work together, and for the first 6 weeks or so, we hated each other because there couldn't have been two more different people in the whole world. And gradually, we got to respect each other and, in fact, love each other, and we did many, many pictures together.
When was that originally?
That was in 1936.
That was right after you came to
Yes,
MGM,
that's
right in the
right.
beginning.
That's right.
Your first film was Gold Diggers of 37?
No, that was just a picture that was made from Sweet Mystery of Life, one of my plays. Our first picture was We Went to College.
We went to college.
Yeah, and the first one that I did with Cy was
They gave him a gun?
they gave him a gun, and I did The Bad Man and Brimstone and Live, Love, and Learn. And then, of course, when I was a producer at Paramount, I also 20 Mule Teen. And then when I was a producer at Paramount, I got Cy, and he worked for me on several of the pictures.
Great Gatsby.
Yes, we also did an interesting picture together, rather a teleplay together, that was called Fearful Decision, which was
Made into a film called Ransom.
yes, that was done on United States Steel and was nominated for an Emmy, and it was very good. It was about with Ralph Bellamy. Was the story of a parent whose child was kidnapped, and who refused to pay the ransom from principle, absolutely out of principle, because he said that if people go on paying ransom, there will continue to be kidnappings because the kidnapper will think it's a profitable thing. And as you know, in England, you cannot pay ransom. It's considered compounding a felony, and as a result, there's practically no kidnapping in England. We had some after it was done by United States Steel. Dory Shari over at Metro wanted to buy it for an awful lot of money, and did. And then we suddenly were told that the FBI was against the picture being made, and we couldn't figure out why. But then we realized that if you don't pay ransom, no money is passed, and the police usually catch the kidnappers when they try to pass the money. You see. And we got out of that by writing a letter to the FBI and asking Mr. Hoover to send us a letter officially stating that the FBI was in favor of the paying of ransom. Of course, he couldn't do that, and so we just went right ahead and made the picture. Actually, it wasn't as good a show as the television was, because it was too long, and the director, a very fine director who's now dead, unfortunately, Alex Siegel, who directs with such intensity that all you could stand of him is about an hour of his stuff, but in almost 2 hours it was just, by the time the real crunch came in the picture, the audience was worn out. And then, of course, Glenn Ford was nowhere near as good as Bellamy. You know, it was bought for Spencer Tracy, and it should have been played by Spencer Tracy. Anyway,
was that done at Paramount? Did you say?
It was done at Metro.
Metro.
Then after all that, when I left Paramount, Cubby came to me, Broccoli, and he was making a series of films with Alan Ladd in England.
Warwick Pictures?
Warwick, that's right. And Alan had suggested, or rather more than that, he'd asked that I go along because of the Ladd, that is, because of the pictures that we'd done together.
Well,
we were very good friends, you see. So that's how I met Broccoli. And I've done, including the 8 Bonds, 17 films for Cubby in England.
He was very successful at that time, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And the other pictures I did for him, there were a couple of very good ones. One was Cockle-Shell Heroes, which is a fine adventure story, out of which Guns of Navarone stemmed. We don't mention that in polite society, but it was before the Guns of Navarone, and that was it. Then I came back. Their company got into trouble, and I came back to the States, and
the company got into trouble?
Trouble, yes. They bought some distribution setup, which and made or contracted to have quite a few pictures made. None of them were very good, and they lost a lot of money, and so they were, not in a very good position. I came back here after having lived in England, and got the job at MGM as the executive producer of MGM TV. And I was there 2 years and started many of their projects and so forth and so on, like Dr. Kildare and many others. And then I left there. There was some difficulty with the Screenwriters Guild that was on strike, and we had sold a couple of shows to be put on the networks, but the strike was going on, and I was expected to hire writers to do the scripts, and I refused because, after all, basically I am and always have been a writer, and I wouldn't hire scab writers. And my wife, thank goodness, is a wonderful girl who told me you have to live with yourself when I asked her what I should do, so I resigned. And shortly thereafter, Cubby called me and said he'd bought the rights, or he had the rights jointly with Harry Saltzman, to the Bond pictures. Now, Cubby had, about 5 years previously, had given me 2 of the Fleming books to read, and he liked them very much, and he asked me to read them, and I read them, and I was excited about them.
This was back while you were doing those films,
this was
like
about,
Paratrooper
yes,
and
that's right. That was about 1957, I think it would be. And who do you call it? Cubby's partner, Irving Allen, didn't particularly like the Bond things. He called them television crap. Anyway, also
Broccoli
basic. No, he didn't have them. He was just interested
I was
in them.
Say Broccoli had tried to interest Allen in them.
Yeah. But also there was another problem. At that time they were censorable. You couldn't really produce them as they were. And without the, quote, sex and violence, which what is going on today was not very sexy or very violent, they wouldn't be the same thing. So somehow nothing happened. Then, some years later...
Do you remember which 2 books he gave you?
Dr. No and Thunderball, I believe.
Dr. No and Thunderball.
And thereafter, Harry Saltzman met Ian Fleming and got an option, a free option from him, to see if he couldn't make a deal with one of the major here in the United States. And he didn't have much success with it. And Wolf Mankiewicz, who was a friend of both of them, Wolf Mankiewicz, the English writer.
English writer,
yes.
Sure.
He said to Harry, look, I don't know, you don't seem to be able to swing this, but everybody loves Cubby. So why don't you? And I know he's interested in these things. So why don't you go and see if you can do something with him? And they did. And Cubby went to New York, and in one day had several deals. And he chose the one from
UA.
UA rather than from Columbia because he'd had some beefs with Columbia about the distribution.
No.
And
I heard that Columbia refused the project.
no, they didn't.
They did?
No, they didn't. I personally have read a letter after the Dr. No had been such a success from, I guess it was from Abe Schneider to Cubby, who said, "Dear Cubby, congratulations for the success of Dr. No. I do think you sort of undersold it when you presented it to us." And that was kind of because Cubby really wanted to go with another studio.
He didn't really
And he went
want
with UA, you see. And so that was that. Then Cubby called me up and he said, "I've got this, the rights to those novels that we talked about. How about hopping over and doing it for us? Which do you think would be the best for a motion picture?" And I said, "Thunderball." So he said, "Well, that's our selection too, so come on over," and over I went. Well, I wrote Thunderball, and it turned out very well. We were very happy about it. And really, almost the day I finished it, I was told that it couldn't be the first one because a man named Kevin McClory was suing Ian Fleming for plagiarism, saying that there had been a screenplay that McClory, Fleming, and a man named Whittingham had written. Jack Whittingham had written. And that company had busted up. Ivor Bryce, Huntington Hartford's brother-in-law, was the fellow who put up the money. And they made a picture which hadn't gone well, and so he got disenchanted with Kevin. And he dissolved the company, and he gave the rights to this screenplay that they had written. It was about James Bond. It was called Latitude, Longitude, something, I don't know quite. And it did have the idea of the bombs being stolen, and the underwater cave, and so forth and so on. And he gave that to Ian Fleming for £1, a nominal payment, you know, that was just a consideration. And then Ian had gone and had written the novel Thunderball after the screenplay was written and given to him by Ivor Bryce.
McClory didn't know anything about
this.
this.
Yes, he knew about it, and he kept very cannily quiet until we announced Thunderball. Then he popped up and sued Ian, you see. And Ian was sick and didn't want to really contest the thing. Well, this happened later on. I'm getting ahead of the story. Anyway, we decided then to do what's his name? Dr. No, on which, without my knowledge, Harry and Cubby had put Wolf Mankiewicz to work. Well, so they said, "You work with Wolf Mankiewicz," and I did, and he hadn't gotten very far on it. So we sat down and we worked together, and I thought he was a charming, delightful character. And this is a funny story. We wrote a story. Neither of us at that time could swallow the idea of Dr. No with the two hooks
and
the bald head and Fu Manchu and all that kind of stuff. So we wrote a story in which there was no Dr. No. Dr. No was the villain's monkey that sat on his shoulder, you see. And it was a pretty good story. But when we showed it to Cubby and Harry, they just screamed and they thought it was awful, and we had a big fight. And they said, "We've got to write it over." Well, by this time, Wolf Mankiewicz got discouraged about the whole thing, and he withdrew, and I sat down and I wrote Dr. No, more or less the way it turned out to be.
Getting rid of the monkey.
Getting rid of the monkey. And every time that Cubby and I have a real argument about stories, he always threatens to tell the world about the monkey. Anyway, that's how it all started.
How did you see James Bond in the first film?
Well, James Bond, everybody said that we did it seriously and it turned out funny, so we decided to make it funny, and that's not quite true. We were surprised at how funny some of the stuff was and how much the audience enjoyed it. But, as I said somewhere else, when a man is chased in an automobile, James Bond is chased in an automobile by a hearse, and he maneuvers to nudge it over a cliff, and it crashes down into the sea on the rocks. And somebody runs up to him and says, "What happened?" And he says, "I don't know. I think they were going to a funeral." Now, you know damn well that was meant to be funny.
Now, was that your line?
I don't know whose line it was, actually. That's one of the things that everybody argues about the lines.
Yes, yes, I can
Um,
realize that.
Actually, I do know the famous lines were mine, and there are some that I'm not quite sure which ones are mine, or Cubby's, or Harry's, or Sean's, or Terence's, or the Grip's. I don't know.
Well, it's true that Sean did. Well, the thing I feel is that Sean had a really great ability to throw away those lines so well, while another actor would have looked ridiculous.
Sean, well, what I'm trying to say is that we knew that Sean, that the character of James Bond was not straight. We really the approach I took to James Bond ever since the start of it was that he was a hero villain. He was an anti-hero.
Anti-hero.
You see, he was a brutal, aggressive killer, and at that time when things were a little gentler, the license to kill thing was played an important part in the character and in the whole atmosphere. Sean, I soon um, felt had a marvelous, naturally sardonic delivery of lines, so that it took it made the humor. It made the humor.
Sinister?
Well, it wasn't sinister so much, but it gave it a dimension.
Sure.
You see what
Sure.
I mean? It gave it to a dimension. And I have always thought that he's absolutely marvelous. Not only did he have all the physical attributes, and you believe that he could knock anybody down or do the things that he was supposed to do, I believed he had this enormous attraction for women and all of the things, all the escape fulfillment attributes that we gave him and which everybody seemed to enjoy. That he was capable of possessing them and of doing the things he was supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, Roger. Roger, I think he's marvelous too, but it's a slightly different thing.
Slightly.
He's not sardonic. He's flip. He's not physically overpowering. He isn't at all. So he's got to sort of trick the opposition. He's got to con them out of it, you see. And it still works.
I spoke with Tom Mankiewicz. He mentioned the fact that when Connery walks into a room, everybody realizes that this guy means business. He has a presence, kind of a
Yes.
tremendous, like a very tough presence.
That's right.
And when Roger walks in the room, it's not as, I mean, he doesn't. It's not his presence that makes it. It's kind of his air that makes
That's
it, which
right.
is totally different.
That is right.
I like the beginning of Doctor No. I like the way Bond is introduced at that card table playing with that girl. I get the Chemin de Fer game. That wasn't in the book. You had to come up with the idea of the Sylvia Trench, the heiress type who ends up in his bedroom in his shirt playing golf.
That's right.
That was an entirely new concept.
That's right. But the amazing thing was this, that when she looked across the table and said, Mr., and then you went to him and he said, Bond, James Bond. It was such a marvelous shot. I can only compare it to the introduction of Clark Gable in Gone with the Wind, when you saw him standing down at the foot of the stairs. It was one of the memorable shots, because if the audience had said, oh, James Bond, you see, if it didn't work, there'd have been no series.
Uh-huh.
It was that one line that he said, James Bond, you see.
Now, I asked Terence Young about that. He says that he remembered a scene from a Wallace Beery film, I think Juarez or something, where they don't show the main character until finally they utter his name and he turns around. I guess that was a kind of a camera way of doing it.
Yes,
helping
that's
that
right.
sequence
That's
work
right.
out. He also
That's
told me
right.
that, or even the girl, I talked to the girl in London, her name was, I forget her name, but she said she was a friend of Young's. They kind of worked in and they were going to keep her in all of the films.
She was in the first two.
Right. And then I guess when the directors changed, she got kind of misplaced. As far as Dr. No, I have a couple of observations I made from the transferring from the book to the movie. I don't know if they really can be explained. Let's see, there's a couple real quick things. The whole thing about the bird sanctuary was thrown out, and you got it was now Dr. No now owned a bauxite mine. Now,
That's right.
did you go on like a reconnaissance to Jamaica?
Yes, I was there.
Before you wrote the
Yes,
script,
yes.
and that's where you
Actually, wait a minute. No, I didn't. I didn't. Not at all. I went on a reconnaissance to New Providence, to Nassau, when we did Thunderball. But the reason that it was changed, it was kind of, embarrassing, the whole idea that after all, it's a Dr. No collects bird shit. What, the iguana, so we figured the bauxite thing was a little less,
silly.
so forth.
Oh, sure, I can understand that. Also, the film all of a sudden took on a science fiction tinge that the book didn't have. It was very up to date and in keeping with the general trend at that time.
Well, I'm sure you realize that we've been very fortunate in that we have been ahead of many of the trends that actually have happened. You see, the Fleming books, they, I think he's marvelous. I think, without his novels, without the particular flair he had for doing all this, there'd have been nothing. But what he did is, his books are short. They're about 140, 150 pages long. And if you analyze them, most of them for the first 60, 70 pages are very colorful and interesting exposition about the characters and so forth and so on,